So today we're going to be talking about Stax and its whole place in the meta and really kind of why it's struggling right now, like Trevor is right now.
I can't help myself. I'm sorry.
What is this podcast called? Can you get that out?
This is the cEDH sermon. How are you doing?
Good. Hey, you got it. Okay, so Stax and why it's struggling right now. We duplicated this lovely Stax list of staples from Kane019. So thank you,
Thank you, Kane019. We edited
organized
it a little bit.
we edited. We removed some of the other ones because we want to talk about the main things. But really, so Trevor, what's your definition of Stax? Just for anyone who's listening who's like, what's Stax? I want to get into cEDH. What is Stax?
So for Stax is an effect that forces a player to play differently than they already do. Or it's something that restricts a player from doing something that they want to do. So I would classify, say, Rhystic Study as a Stax piece. Even if you don't think it is a Stax piece because you are forcing a player to make the decision of, are you paying the one or are you going to let me get a draw?
That's actually a really good.
They place.
That's a really good point about Rhystic Study being a Stax piece. Most people think of it as a draw engine, which it is. That's why it's so good. But I would say it is mainly a draw engine. But like you said, it makes people play differently. You have to think about paying. Am I going to pay the one for this? Am I just going to hold back? I can't play as much. Or if I do play all out, this player is going to be drawing more and potentially have more card advantage over me and be able to stop me or win on their turn. So things to think about. Now, yeah, your definition was spot on. So some common Stax decks. We've got, we're going to talk about, we're not going to go super in depth with the decks, but just we might be referring to things like Winota, which is an aggro Stax deck. You're trying to attack with all of your creatures and swarm everyone, usually winning through combat damage. Sometimes there's Kiki-Jiki infinite combo lines, but you're trying to play a bunch of small creatures that stacks everyone out and prevent them from playing their game plans while you're overrunning them. You have something like Blood Pod, which I do actually, if we're going to focus on a deck, I do kind of want to talk a lot about Blood Pod because it is kind of, it uses the same Kiki-Jiki lines in a card called Birthing Pod. It gets that's where it gets the name Blood Pod from, to combo out and win the game. But it has access to a bunch of different Stax pieces due to being 4 colors. But I think it kind of potentially has an identity crisis, which is why it hasn't been winning a lot lately. You haven't seen Blood Pod at the top of tournaments, at least not ones that I've been looking at. You have some more unique things like Shorikai that takes advantage of being a vehicle. So it's can be crude and then it's a creature, but you can have these anti-creature effects and your commander is a vehicle most of the time. So it's not affected by this. So you can really punish creature decks, which we're seeing in the meta a lot, and you're not affected by that. Then you have things more fringe like Yasharn. Maybe Derevi can be built in a Stax way. Tayum is kind of mid-range. I've seen Tayum have Adnaz game plans. I've seen it Stax game plans. Tayum's kind of all over the place. It's the weird, cousin that no one knows is like your second cousin who came with your grandpa's new girlfriend, and you're like, who the hell is this? That's Tayum. He's awesome.
Yeah.
But no one knows who the hell he is.
That's a perfect example of what time is. It's your second cousin that no one really knows, but he's pretty cool.
But he's pretty cool, and he's there.
He's there.
And then you've got stuff like maybe Minsk, which I love that list, but that is it's kind of more of a turbo a game plan. You're trying to just rush out the combo with some Stax pieces in there. But those are just kind of the main decks, and we can talk about those more in depth at another time. But I just kind of wanted to give everyone a generalized idea of where Stax is in the meta. Let's go over to the cEDH tournaments, EDH top 16, and let's just kind of see. This is sorted by date, 60 plus players past 6 months. So this is the most recent one, February 1st, Snowy Summit 2. Actually, this guy, I think Glarg is his name, the one where you can cast 4 CMC spells and above off the top of your library. He won. Yeah, he won another one. Like a week before that. Yeah, we'll have to look into that guy. He looks interesting. But he won a couple. You got Magda, Kinnan, of course, Rog Thrasios, Tevis Thrasios. So a lot. I mean, these are all Marnius, Kinnan, of course, your Blue Farm. Oh, that's interesting. I haven't seen this deck in a while. I can't even think of what. Yeah, Tulane. That's right. That is awesome. That's awesome that he won one. I haven't seen that deck in forever. But I'm not seeing many Stax decks. I haven't seen a single one. Now, I do know that Tameshi, which can sometimes be a Stax deck, won one back in November, but I looked at the list and it wasn't even really Stax. And Zerda actually won one, which since it's Boros, it's red-white, it tends to play a lot of Stax pieces. Which
hell yeah.
I knew you'd love that.
I have my own Zerda list that I'm like try to make cEDH viable, but it's pretty complicated because you don't have blue, so it's hard to like make it anything. But like, I'm super stoked about that. That's awesome.
I knew you'd like that. I was kind of happy to be like,
congratulations on your win, Wayne J. Liu.
Yeah, dude. But I looked through his list and didn't have too many Stax pieces in there. There was another one, I think a Minsk one, and maybe a Zur, which I know Zur can be built in a Stax. Yeah, here's the Zur. All these ones won in November.
Oh, yeah.
November was like Stax's little last hurrah, but not really, because the common theme among all of those wins was, even though they were, potentially built as Stax decks, or they were traditionally built as Stax decks under those commanders, they were kind of straying away from it, which kind of goes into our main point of, if you're going to play Stax, you have to be proactive. You can't just put Stax pieces on board and hope that you're going to lock everyone out and go in with this slow, grindy combo. You can slow the game down, but you have to be moving forward. You can't be defensive anymore. cEDH has way too many answers, things to bounce, things, there's just too much that people can be doing on top of Stax effects at instant speed. Yeah, it's just, you can't be I think, you said right before we started recording, I wish we would have gotten that. You're like, yeah, you can't be reactive.
Be proactive rather than reactive. A lot of Stax effects are being reactive, or at least trying to prevent somebody from doing something. And that's good in a way, but players, if they're a good pilot of their deck, they should be able to get around that effect, or be able to get rid of the piece that is causing them troubles. So like in my Tivit list, which is my go-to deck, it has some Stax pieces. Like it's got Curse Totem and Grafdigger's Cage and Grand Abolisher, or not. Well, it has Grand Abolisher, but Grand Arbiter. But the gameplay of that deck isn't really to Stax out the board. It's more of, I'm going to play these really good Stax pieces just in case somebody's going to go off with like a graveyard effect, or just in case somebody's going to go off with a creature ability.
And your deck makes use of all of them too. The Grand
Oh yeah.
Arbiter Augustine, while it does make spells cost more for your opponents, it makes your Tivit cost less. And then you have, what was the other one you mentioned? Cursed Totem. Your commander doesn't rely on activated abilities.
I was going to say none of my cards have activated abilities. I do run Urza. That's the only card in my entire deck that runs activated abilities. So if I was trying to win off of Urza, I would just have to not play Cursed Totem.
Yeah, but usually that's just kind of in there for value. And, you're not going to see in a singleton format with, 100 cards, you're probably not going to see both of those. And if you do, you just don't win with Urza, but you still use it as a value piece. So, that's a good point as well. So, let's go into some of the pieces here. And really quick, just to reiterate, so point number one, you have to be proactive. I would say if there's a main point number two, it is that you have to either have a built-in way into your deck, into your strategy to break parity on the Stax piece, or it has to be one-sided. One of those two, and that is the main thing. You can't have a Stax piece that says, something like a rule of law effect where players can only cast one spell a turn, but you don't really have a way of benefiting off that. Now everyone's just slowed down. All you're waiting for at that point is the turbo player to bounce that rule of law to your hand and go off. That's not how you want to be playing. You have to have now something like Winota, who gets value off of swinging with creatures and just pulling cards out of the deck onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Winota can greatly benefit off of Rule of Law. That is a perfect card for a deck like that. So that's a good example of when to use Rule of Law or not using it. If you just don't have that type of ability like Winota does, you're just going to be sitting there in the same position of everyone else. And if your whole deck is jammed up with Stax pieces, you don't have a super fast way of winning. You're just waiting for someone else to win. So what kind of effect do you want to talk about first?
You're talking about Rule of Law. Let's just go with that.
Yeah.
Let's
talk about
one card
Rule of Law.
Let's talk about Rule of Law and why it's actually the worst Rule of Law effect.
It's just the first one, I think. That's a very good point. It is the worst Rule of Law effect, but it's one of the first ones. I think actually Arcane Laboratory, which is hilarious. It's a blue card that's an enchantment that's also 3 mana. And it also reads, each player can't cast more than one spell a turn. But no one plays it because it's in blue.
Yeah. So Rule of Law effects are really good, especially if you're going up against like fast decks like Rogsai, or, just in general, they're really good because they slow down the game state. They make sure that, your opponents aren't playing too much on their turn. They're playing the good, clean Magic. They're playing one spell. They're playing their land. That's it. And you mentioned Blood Pod. Blood Pod loves Rule of Law effects. Things like Deafening Silence, you can break parity really easily because it's only non-creature spells, and if you run a very creature-focused deck like Blood Pod does, you can get around that pretty easily. You can break parity as well with High Noon, because you can sacrifice High Noon.
I love that card.
This card, I need to get this card. Like, it's
so
fucking good.
Is. So I play it in my Minsk deck, and Minsk is another one where all of the combos are creature-based, and I'm technically not really casting anything with the combo. I won't get into it because it gets really convoluted, but it involves repeatedly pulling creatures out of the deck and then sacrificing them to get new creatures, and then it brings this one back, and then these two creatures combo with each other. I'm sure some of you, or a lot of you, are familiar with the Protean Hulk lines with Kiki Jiki, Karmic Guide, Felidar Guardian, all of those cards. I'm not really casting anything. So a card like High Noon, which is the same thing as Rule of Law, each player can't cast more than one spell each turn, but this High Noon also says it, but it's cheaper by 1 mana, and it has the ability pay 4 and 1 red to sacrifice High Noon. It deals 5 damage to any target. The greatest thing about that is it can sacrifice itself. If for some reason I'm in a situation where I have to cast more than 1 spell, boom, I can get rid of it. And it also deals damage. I mean, that is incredible. And it's cheaper than Rule of Law. So the fact that I'm naturally protected by other players not being able to cast as many things. They can only cast 1 spell a turn. That includes on other players' turns. So yeah, it's a fantastic card.
Just being able to stop your opponents or slow down your opponents while also having the ability to sacrifice it whenever you want so you can pop off. It's amazing. I love it. You also have Eidolon of Rhetoric, which is exactly like Rule of Law, but it's on a creature, or it's on an enchantment creature. You've got Earthsworn Canonist?
Yeah, Aethersworn
I hope I said that right.
Canonist? Yeah.
Yeah.
Aetherdrift Canonist? No, just kidding. Aethersworn.
Which, you know, what is this? Each player who has played a non-artifact spell this turn can't play an additional non-artifact spell. Perfect. It's just another Royal Law effect, but you can still play your rocks and stuff. And then the Phyrexian Censor, which is just a Rule of Law that breaks parity with Phyrexian creatures. If you're doing that, I don't know too many decks that want to do that, but there you go. An ability that you can.
So basically, you're not really breaking parity with it. It's just so. This is a good point to bring up. So notice how about half of those are enchantments and half of them are creatures. So I will say there's benefits to both. It is way easier to remove a creature, but it is also way easier to tutor and search for a creature and find it and play it. So that's kind of the trade-off. I will also say that creatures have the benefit of adding board presence. You can block with them. You can attack with them. Both Phyrexian Censor and Eidolon of Rhetoric have decent toughnesses. You can chump block a Najeela with the Eidolon, and then you can chump block Timna with both of them.
Another thing, which is one of my favorite plays, is you can use Eidolon of Rhetoric, and you can use Eldritch Evolution, sacrificing your Eidolon of Rhetoric to get a creature that you want, and then you can play more spells on your fucking turn.
Yes, like if you've played it on a previous turn, and then you let's just say you're in a Bant colored deck, white, blue, green, and you Neoform, or like you said, Eldritch Evolution, your Eidolon, which sacrifices it, and then you search for a creature out of your deck that, enables you to go off. So I do like creatures are easier to sack. There's so many sacrifice this creature, do this type of effects. They're just easier to manipulate than artifacts, I would say, or enchantments. But the enchantments are likely going to stick around a little bit more. They're a little harder to remove, in my opinion.
Yeah. Rule of Law in general is it's a good effect if you want to play good clean magic in cEDH. I think Deafening Silence for creature focused decks is the pinnacle of what you want, because you can break parity pretty easily with that one.
Definitely.
Same with High Noon.
So I think that pretty much covers Rule of Law. There's a bunch of other ins and outs with it, but that's a good generalized overview, and that's kind of what we want to do. So what's the another category? Scroll down. What else?
Move to ouphe effects. It's right up here.
Yeah, that's actually that's perfect. And I'm pretty sure in one of our previous episodes we argued a shitload on Stony Silence. I love that argument. So I was like, fuck this card, and Trevor was like, no, we are including this. We are not getting rid of it. So ouphe effects get the name from Collector Ouphe, which is 1 in a green for a creature, ouphe, and it's a 2/2, and it reads, activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. Now, the reason that is so important is artifacts are a huge source of mana, especially, I mean, from every deck, but the turbo lightning fast decks, they want to draw a bunch of cards, play all of their really cheap mana rocks, and start going off and generate a bunch of mana really quickly. This basically says, nah, you're not going to do that. And if you have any sort of combo like Basalt Monolith that you're going to try and go infinite with, or, you know, Walking Ballista, I guess that's technically an activated ability too. Yeah, nope, not going to work. So, great effect.
And it's really easy to break parity with this because you just essentially you run the 4 best mana rocks, which are Sol Ring, Mox Diamond, and Chrome Mox, and then one more that I can't remember. You essentially
Lotus
just
Petal,
run
maybe?
the best, probably. You just run the best ones, and then you don't really worry about the you don't really worry about them if you play a Collector Ouphe or a Null Rod, and you bank on mana dorks. So, like, you're not really focusing on getting mana rocks out. So it's easy to break parity with these things. Also, Blood Pod loves these effects. I ran Collector Ouphe and Null Rod in my Blood Pod deck just to shut down the game. But you also have to then run a lot of things like Eldritch Evolution or Nature's Claim to make sure that you can get rid of your Null Rod or Collector Ouphe when you want to go off. Which is just some slight tweaking that you have to do when you are playing these things, and if you're doing a birthing pod loop.
Yeah, actually, really quick, something that we should do for each of these categories, and I want to just kind of put the seal on rule of law effect before we go too much more into the ouphe effect. To bring it back to our point of where Stax is and why it's struggling, I think the reason why rule of law is you used to see it constantly when turbo decks were running rampant, but right now mid-range decks we're in mid-range hell. They are the top of the food chain, and those mid-range decks have so many pieces that have so much value that they can get away with only playing one really powerful, full of value piece a turn. So they can wait. They can just wait and outgrind you, and you're playing all these Stax effects, and they're like, I'll just play my Kinnan this turn, and I'll just play a Seedborn Muse this turn. And all of a sudden, they have so much more card advantage, mana advantage. They're ahead of you in every way possible. So I think that's why rule of law effects, while you still see them, they're kind of a little bit more down right now in the meta, just because they're not as powerful as they used to be. They used to be stopping the turbo ad nauseam decks, and while there still are turbo decks around, plenty of them, it's not doing enough to slow down the mid-range decks. So back to the ouphes.
Now, with ouphes, you usually see Collector Ouphe and Null Rod. You don't really see Stony Silence. You can play it, but
it's damn right you don't see it.
But or Karn. You see Karn if you want. You usually play those 3: Collector Ouphe, Karn, or Null Rod. But that's because they're easy to get out. Especially Null Rod. Super easy to get out. It's just 2 generic mana. Which is always
Absolutely
fun to do, like Ancient Tomb into a Null Rod on turn 1.
Oh yeah, Trevor loves his Ancient Tombs into Null Rods when he's playing my Kinnan deck, and I'm like, this game is it's going to be a long game, and he's like,
it's going to be one
I
of
don't
those
really
games.
I kept a 2-land hand with no ramp in it, so this is going to be slow, and I'm just like, please draw a Chain of Vapor, and I'm just getting all my mana rocks and all this dope stuff that I can't play. Oh yeah, Trevor loves that. Usually you'll see Karn. If I've seen Kinnan decks play it, because at the off chance that your Basalt gets exiled, you can bring it back from outside the game, but I would rather just pivot to Hullbreaker Horror or some other sort of win con in Kinnan, as opposed to having something I can't really tutor for. But I do think it's a cool piece, though. If you're going that route, and I do like that it doesn't just say activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. It says activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control. That's huge. I almost forgot about that factor, and I think while it is the most expensive at 4 mana, it is 4 generic mana, and it is one-sided. You know, fuck you and your artifacts. I'm all good over here. With that said, really hard to tutor out planeswalkers, and there's only a couple cards I can even think of, and I don't remember their names. There's like a red card that searches, and maybe a white card that searches for planeswalkers. So I don't know. It's a cool. I do like that it breaks parity. I think it's very deck specific, but I think a lot of decks, Stax decks tend to be white, green, maybe with some red in it or some other colors. But I think that's why Collector Ouphe is the most common, because it is a creature. You can easily get rid of it if you need to go off and do your thing with artifacts, and it's easy to tutor or reanimate or, Eldritch Evolution, a Birds of Paradise into it. I don't know. Just probably wouldn't want to do that. Actually, that's probably a bad play, but it's an option. It's an option. So
it's an option. Yeah, I think that's enough said about ouphe effects. They're really good. They're probably one of my favorite Stax pieces, just because they really screw over the table.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Trevor loves his ouphe effects. The thumbnail for this video should be your face on the Collector Ouphe card. You know what? That already looks enough like you, so we'll just leave it as is and say,
actually,
that's Trevor.
Ian, I'm going to say this. I think I just haven't grown out of my punk phase when I was a teenager. Because you know how punks, they love to be hated? That's me when I play Magic. I just love playing Stax pieces and then everyone hating me.
I know, and it sucks that Stax is down bad right now.
I know. Otherwise, I mean, if there was a good, if Stax was a little bit more proactive, I'd probably play it more.
I think we all struggled to outgrow our punk phase. I even went back a couple of years ago and decided to have a mohawk again for a month or so, because I'm like, come on, let me do one more mohawk. But let me ask you this. So even though Collector Ouphe, it still sees a decent amount of play, I've even seen it taken out of lists that usually play it in favor of just running more artifacts and going faster. So why do you think that is? Why are the ouphe effects also struggling right now?
Well, obviously it's because when you're playing these effects, you are limiting yourself to mana dorks and just relying on mana dorks and lands and potentially some rituals. Because mana rocks are super easy to get out, super useful, super versatile. But when you start playing Collector Ouphe or Null Rod or Karn or even Stony Silence, you have to start thinking about removing the mana rocks from your deck. And I think that's why.
Yeah, with the exception of Karn, just because it doesn't affect yours. But a good point about your limiting yourself to lands and mana dorks, and Orcish Bowmasters just pinging down it doesn't even have to ping them down. It can just snipe almost every mana dork, even on ETB. And then another opponent draws an extra card and it just destroys another one of your mana dorks. So you're just kind of in a rough situation right now. And then even Collector Ouphe can be easily killed by an Orcish Bowmasters. So it's just kind of, again, it's another kind of double chain link. Well, why aren't they as good? Well, because you have to play mana dorks, and why aren't mana dorks good? Well, Orcish Bowmasters. So, yeah, I think we're going to be here in mid-range hell for a while, but let's let's take a look at another common Stax effect. We'll kind of break that down.
What do you want to do? You want
to? Let's go back down. What was the next? Okay, let's go over silence effect real quick. Now, I would say, while silence and Orum's chant are both, silence is literally where the term comes from. I consider them more so interaction, because they're spells. But and the stuff like Grand Abolisher and Kutzil is more protective.
There's not even
in nature.
I'm sorry. There's not even Docent of the Fallen Leaf on this list.
Oh,
that should be on the silence effects. Just
I think
throw
so
that on
too.
screen. It's a great card.
Yeah, that'll be up on screen. Now, I don't even personally stuff like Grand Abolisher and Dosan and Kutzil, I don't really consider. And then I guess Conqueror's Flail. I consider them more so protective effects. I consider them the onboard protection effects, where I cast them either the turn before, or that's the first thing I do. During my turn, opponents can't activate abilities or cast spells, or can't cast spells on your turn, whatever. Either way, it's basically like, hey, if you can't counter or kill, actually they can't even kill it once it hits the board. If you can't counter this, I'm free to do whatever I want this turn and I can win. As opposed to something like Ranger Captain of Eos, I do consider it more of a Stax effect, because while you have to sacrifice it in order for your opponents to not cast non-creature spells this turn, the fact that it's on board and you can kind of hold it up, almost like your finger on the trigger, like, I can do this. If you try and go off, I'll sacrifice them and you won't be able to win. So I think almost just by having that ability on there, it is more of a Stax effect, as opposed to the Grand Abolisher and Kutzil, which is only on your turn. And then Teferi, Time Raveler, I think is also more of a actual Stax effect. I think it does actually fit in this category, because each opponent can cast spells only any time they could cast a sorcery. That is crippling. cEDH is a format of instants. Usually a fourth of your deck is instant spells.
Yeah. Now, with Teferi and Docent of the Fallen Leaf, you have to be careful when you play them, because if you play them and then pass the turn, you are essentially just giving somebody else the win, because they have a protected board state.
Unless you have, at least with Teferi, you can still have the counters. But
with Teferi you can. With Docent you can't. I believe Docent's just everyone can't play on anybody else's turn.
Yep, correct.
But with Kutzil and Ground Abolisher, those effects are something that you can drop down turn 2, turn 3, and be like, okay, at least on my turn, I don't have to worry about anybody doing anything else.
Exactly. And that's why I think they're more of the protective stuff, but that's just how my mind classifies them. I see what they're definitely, it's almost like a fourth of the time Stax effect, where it's only staxing people on your turn. But you're right, it does force people to play different or not play at all. But I see why it's included.
Yeah.
Oh, the other thing with Ranger Captain is the ability to potentially recur it. I've seen, I don't know the combo exactly, but tie-em decks, they call it Ranger Captain locking. And they just lock everyone out of the game by like every turn. They just keep recurring it and sacrificing it.
That sounds like fun.
Fucking turn. Oh, yeah. You should build tie-em.
Oh, you are kind of convincing me to build tie-em just to do that.
Well, we were talking about, because I was like, man, I kind of want to build tie-em, but I don't know. And then I was looking at Magda, and I'm like, one of us should build Magda and one of us should build tie-em.
I'll build tie-em if you build Magda.
Yeah. Let's do it. But you'll have to teach me how to play tie-em, because I do want to know how to play it. It does look like fun.
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I'm going to have to learn how to play it anyway, so I'll teach you how to play it.
Hell yeah. All right.
Um,
To be honest, I think that's all there is to say about silence effects. I would say that these are more proactive in nature, at least even though they're defensive, you're playing them right before you're winning. At least the Grand
yeah.
Abolisher and Cutzel, you're saying, here's
Even
my.
Teferi and Dosen, you're playing them to win the game. Like,
Yes. And then silence is in almost every deck with white. Actually, I would be shocked if you didn't run it.
Staple. Orange
Ranger
chance,
Captain?
not so much, but silence is a staple.
Absolutely. Forum's chant, we went over it in our tier list where it's another, it's a budget and not really a budget. I mean, I guess it's cheaper, but it's just a poor man's silence in the sense that you're like, I just want another silence effect. Might as well throw this in. But those are ones that aren't actually struggling. I would say that silence effects are not struggling right now.
They're pretty good. Let's just casually scroll down to the Tangle Wire effects and talk about these.
These are extremely deck specific.
Yeah, you would not see these in every deck. These are pretty much like you have to have a reason to be running them. Now, Tangle Wire is a really good, since you're going to be building Magda, Tangle Wire is a really good deck in Magda because you're forced to tap your dwarves when with it.
Oh, that's right. So you don't even have to swing with them. And I know that's a big thing with Magda is you're trying to come up with reasons other than just attacking potentially, because a lot of times you have these 1-mana 1/1 dorks that can easily be killed. It's still worth tapping them to get the treasures, but I know you're trying to come up with other reasons to tap them. A lot of people on our Ether Drift review, they said we missed a good Magda card, which was it was a 2-mana vehicle with flash, and they're like, this is huge for Magda. You can flash it in and start tapping all your dorks, or not dorks, your dwarves instantly, because you can crew the vehicle. So cool point there. I've been getting blown up about Magda. Every time I post on Reddit or on our video, everyone's always like, oh, you missed this Magda thing. Everyone's super nice,
just means
though.
You need to play Magda.
I know.
You just need to play Magda.
Sorry, guys. I'll be better with Magda.
Now, I think looking at this list of Tangle Wire effects, I think the one deck that actually wants to be playing all of this is Urza, because Urza is just like gung-ho about artifacts and making sure people can't do anything on their turns. So like Winter Orb, for example, I think is a staple. I wouldn't say a staple, mainly because I don't know, but I want to say it's a staple.
In Urza, I would say yeah.
In Urza.
Now, pull up the Oracle text, because both Winter Orb and Static Orb, they say unless they're untapped or unless they're tapped, the original cards don't say that. View details. As long as Winter Orb is untapped, players can't untap more than one land during their untap steps. So,
oh yeah, that's because
with Urza,
fucking old rule.
You tap it with Urza's ability, so you get to go off.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, that's why Urza plays it, because then everyone else is fucked, and you're doing fine. Urza's like,
so
hell
it breaks parity, so that makes sense.
Yeah, same with Static Orb. I'm almost positive.
Well, this is because of
as long as it's untapped.
Old ruling. Back in the day, it used to be artifacts had their abilities unless they were tapped.
Exactly.
So
cool little history there. But oh my god, those are Urza cards for sure. That is why they are incredible. Now, Stasis is if you just want to be a complete asshole. Each player skips his or her untap phase. Oof.
And then you can pay
mean.
blue and bury it.
Which is nice.
Perfect.
This has Trevor written all over it. This has I want to be an asshole.
You should play it.
No, you just want to be one. You have one.
Yeah. Like,
and you want to be one. Yeah, you are one. I'd say you are one.
You know what? Have you ever heard the phrase "opinions are like assholes"?
Yes, I hear that. People tell me this all the time. Are they trying to imply something?
No, opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one, and no one wants to see it.
That's a different version. That's a different version of it. I haven't heard that version. No one wants to see it. Oh my god.
But Hokori, there we go. Dust Drinker, lands don't untap during their controllers on tap steps. Back to basics. Non-basic lands don't untap during their controllers on tap steps. Lands don't untap during their tap steps. Rising Waters, like, just force people to slow play for the entire game.
Yeah. Now, there's a reason you don't see the Hokori Dust Drinker. You don't see this one as much just because the untapped, so many players have mana dorks, mana rocks, and you're not getting, it's not impossible, but you're likely not getting Hokori Dust Drinker out in the first turn or two. So first turn or two, everyone's playing their rocks, their dorks, a couple lands, and then you slam this out and you're like, haha, you can't untap during your lands. It's like, well, I still have 5 mana with all my rocks and dorks, and I just don't think it's good enough. It's worth mentioning. Yeah. If your whole deck is around this and you have a built-in way of breaking parity with this, I think it's fine. But yeah, there's a reason you don't see a lot of these effects outside of Urza, because Urza, again, back to our 2 points, we're going to be hammering this home. You have to be proactive, and you have to be able to break parity, or it has to be one-sided. And all of those Winter Orb, Static Orb, Tangle Wire type effects, Urza is like, oh, this is no problem. This is my wheelhouse. Yeah, I remember playing in a 1v1 tournament. I sat down against this Urza player, and I could just tell he knew what he was doing. And I was like, damn, I'm intimidated right now. And we actually went 1-1-1. I won, he won, and then at one point we each had a Hullbreaker horror out, and it was like we had to call a judge over because there was just so many effects going on at once, and the judge was like, okay, hold on, I forgot, it was so long ago. There was like multiple Hullbreaker horrors. I think there might have even been a third one, and we're like, because someone copied one, and we're like, who does what in this scenario? What happens in what order? All you rule buffs out there probably are like, well, technically, you just do this. It's simple. Not for us. Not for us. I want to bounce my rocks and go infinite. That's all I want to think about.
Yeah, those are the Tangle Wire effects. I think we should move on to the one underneath, which is probably the more popular effect, simply because of 2 cards in the format. But that's the tax effects. And these are I guess 3 cards, because we have Esper Sentinel, Rhystic Study, and Mystic Remora. They're all tax effects. They're all saying, hey, you can play whatever you want, but you have to pay your fucking taxes.
And Smothering Tithe, too, is actually kind of, in the past 2 years, I'd say it saw a huge resurgence. It was kind of like all of a sudden you see decks like Blue Farm are playing it, and a lot of Tivit decks play it. So yeah, those basically the Esper Sentinel, Mystic Remora, and Rhystic Study are the draw versions of that, where if every time they play a spell, if they can't pay the tax, you draw a card. And then with Smothering Tithe, it's whenever they draw a card, if they don't pay, you get to create a treasure token, which gives you mana. Yeah. So the draw on these types of effects is definitely more powerful, just because you're already going to have so many, or I should say more often than not, the draw is going to be more powerful, because you're usually in cEDH, the main focus is getting a bunch of mana as quick as possible. setting up a draw engine,
Yeah.
and going from there. So if you already have the mana taken care of, the draw just kind of is the yin to the yang, I guess, or the whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And then the Smothering Tithe, though, if you're in a deck with Thrasios or you have an outlet to put that mana into to draw more, then that's a different story.
Now, most of these are... That is a different story. Most of these are just generic, pay 2 more, pay 1 more, pay 1 more. I think Trinisphere is the only one that I would say is more beneficial because it makes your opponents have to pay 3 for anything less than 3.
Yeah, read that one. That one's an interesting one.
Okay. So for 3 mana, you can get an artifact that says, as long as Trinisphere is untapped, each spell that would cast less than 3 mana to play costs 3 mana to play. So essentially, you want to play Chrome Mox, you have to pay 3. You want to play a mana dork like Elvish Mystic, you have to pay 3, which is very, very significant.
Especially for turbo decks. Those turbo decks that want to play 1 mana and 0 free mana rocks, all of a sudden they have to pay 3 for all of them. Counter spells that are free. No, it's not free anymore. Or all those 1 mana counter spells like Flusterstorm and Swan Song. Nope, those are all 3 mana. It completely changes the way the game is played. I think, with the exception of the Esper Sentinel, Mystic, Rhystic, and Smothering Tithe, which are just hugely beneficial for generating the tax effect that also generates you advantage. That's why they're all played. Trinisphere, with the exception of those 4, is the best card out of the remaining pieces in this section.
There's also Defense Grid, which isn't on this list, but we'll put it up right now. And that one is pretty good because it's essentially if you want to go off, you can kind of get a protective win by making all of your opponents pay an additional 2 to cast anything on your turn.
Yep, it's like similar to those other the Grand Abolisher of protective effects, but it is just another way. If you don't have access to white, let's say you're in blue farm, I would never play Defense Grid because you have Ranger Captain and Grand Abolisher. But if I'm in Rogsai and I don't have white, I'm definitely playing Defense Grid. So that's a good point.
You play Defense Grid.
Yeah. The reason Trinisphere is so good is, again, back to our big point, you can break parity on it. So a deck that I've seen run it, I don't personally run it in my list, but Kinnan, because you're going to have so much mana, you don't care about having to pay a little bit more for your spells. And usually what you do is you set up everything. You play Kinnan, you play all your rocks and your dorks, and then you jam a Trinisphere down. And all of a sudden, I don't care if I have to pay 3 mana for a counter spell or whatever. So does everyone else. And I've got the most mana out of everyone. I think it's an awesome include. I think it's better for the mid-range game plan, and I tend to lean a little bit more towards the faster play of Kinnan, but I do think it's an awesome include for Kinnan. That's a good example of a deck that can get away with paying the extra mana, whereas everyone else is affected. So I'm trying to think. There's a lot of cards, Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, where non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast, and Thorn of Amethyst. There's a bunch of other ones that are basically the same thing.
Grand Arbiter, which isn't on this list, but one of my favorite cards, is also tax effect.
Yep, there's some unicorn. I know Winota decks play it just because it's a non-human, and then they'll play Thalia because it is a human that you can search out. I think unless you're running, you kind of have to go all or nothing on those, because the second you're not, because it's not that big of a deal to have to pay 1 more, but paying 2 or 3, I mean, that's when it becomes kind of rough. So, but then you still have to find all of those. And I think there's a reason you don't really see those effects as much anymore. And it's because it breaks the first rule. It's the opposite of proactive. You're making everything cost more, but the only way to make it worth it is if you play a bunch of these. And if you're playing a bunch of things that make things cost more, you're not, that's one less tutor, one less counterspell, one less combo piece that you're playing. So that's my take on it.
All right. Let's see. What do we want to talk about next? I think we will go to the section that is
Was that the last thing at the bottom?
No, there's two more, but I would like to talk about the section that I called "Fuck Your Draw."
Oh, fuck your draw, you say?
Yeah, and which I've also put in Sire of Insanity because you don't get a goddamn hand. Get out of here!
I hate playing against that card.
I love Sire of Insanity.
You don't see it that much anymore, but wasn't Blood Pod playing it for a bit as like a
my
six drop?
My Blood Pod list had it because I could Eldritch Evolution my Talia into.
You mean your Tana?
Or Tana, not Talia. My Tana into a Sire of Insanity and just stacks the board out that way.
Yeah, and it's brutal. And again, once again, the Trevor mentality of I'm just trying to make you suffer until I win. And trust me, this card will make you suffer.
Yeah.
Narset.
But these
I do like Narset a lot because of its ability to, it's only each opponent can't draw. And you do have that added ability. A lot of people don't ever activate it. But if I feel like I'm going to die on the crackback anyways, and it's going to get killed, I'll activate the ability, look at the top 4, reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them, and put it into my hand. Yeah, sure, I'll do that.
Yeah. Notion Thief. A lot of people aren't playing Notion Thief because Orcish Bowmaster is rampant in the meta, but
the 3/1 kills it.
Yeah, but everyone also complains about Ristic and Mystic, like drawing everybody's cards, like you want to, or even the One Ring, like you want to stop them from drawing so many cards, just play Notion Thief. Kind of, who cares about Orcish Bowmaster? It's just one card that's in everyone's deck, but like you can run a Notion Thief and just like kind of bank on the fact that people might not have the Orcish Bowmaster in hand.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think it's a great card because not only does it prevent them from drawing, except for the first one they draw, but you get to draw the card instead. And like you said, who cares about Orcish Bowmasters? I think you can't be too afraid. You can't say, well, some people might have a counter spell, so I'm just not going to do anything. Well, people might have Orcish Bowmaster, so I'm not going to play anything with 1 toughness.
Yeah.
And now at 4 mana, also, this is Notion Thief is
You're playing Dimir, so you're going to have an Orcish Bowmaster yourself, so you can just cast the Orcish Bowmaster in response to their Orcish Bowmaster.
Which then theirs would still enter and
it would still kill it, but now you have an Orcish Bowmaster, which is
which is better than not having one.
Exactly.
I think it's such a divisive card because for everything on Notion Thief that makes it good, there's something that's bad. It's like, it is 4 mana, but it has flash. And it is a 3/1, but it steals the draws. So it's like...
It steals the draw.
I think it's also another one that's deck dependent. It's like just because you're in Dimir doesn't mean you're going to jam this card. Whereas if you're in black, you're playing Orcish Bowmasters. But I do think maybe decks like Talion, I think you said that. I think you mentioned that. Could really benefit from something like Notion Thief.
Another card that is very deck dependent is Shieldred. The gain life whenever you draw a card is huge, and the dealing 2 damage to your opponents whenever they draw a card is huge, but it doesn't do as much as you'd like. because people can just play through it, right? Like, sure, I'm gonna draw 7 cards off of my One Ring, and you're gonna deal 14 damage to me, but I'm not gonna die from that, right? I'm still gonna draw the 7 cards and still have a chance to win. So it's really deck dependent, and if you want to be running it or not.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And now, like you said, deck dependent. Speaking of which, the Ether Drift Commander Ketramos that we did the deck tech on, this was a amazing synergy in that, because every time you draw a card, you lose a life from your commander's ability. But instead of gaining 2 life or losing 1 life, it just nets you 1 life. So now you can totally go off with a bunch of the Ketramos synergies and gain life instead of losing. So, and it has the added benefit, like you said, of punishing your opponent's draws. And that's just any draw. That's not other than the first one. And, you know, they can only draw 1 card a turn. That's just anytime they're drawing, they're losing a life. So I think great as a include and a side benefit in decks that already want it. But like you said, it's very deck dependent.
And furthermore on Shieldred, I don't know if it's going to be standard legal when this episode comes out, but it is currently standard legal, and it is a pain in the ass to deal with. So,
I bet, because dealing with a 4/5 in standard, I don't really know standard that much, but in like that's kind of like a bomb tier card in.
Oh yeah, it's a bomb
formats.
unless you're like me and you just play Witness Protection, and you're like, oh, Shieldred, that's cute. It's now a citizen.
That's probably the best way of dealing with it. So
yeah.
I do think the card that you see the most out of here, and this is kind of a pattern that we're noticing, and you guys should pick up on, each one of these sections clearly has one standout card, and this of the fuck your draw section is Orcish Bowmasters, because I actually think it doesn't end up punishing the person drawing the card as much. I think that's the biggest problem with it, is it's not like it's a bad card, but it doesn't really, even though whenever they draw a card except for their first one, you can deal a damage to any target. It doesn't just say deal a damage to them. You get to choose the target. So usually one player's overdrawing the cards and you're pinging someone else's mana dorks. So
yeah.
Or they're Notion Thieves or Spirit of the Labyrinths, or so I do think that, like, yes, you have the option of punishing that player, but usually someone else, the easiest weakest targets get picked off. But picking off easy, weak targets, that's not a bad deal.
Pretty fun. Yeah.
Pretty fun. So I think that's the main thing about the anti-draw section. What about, unless you had any other thoughts?
The only other thought I have is that Wizards of the Coast should probably ban Orcish Bowmasters, and that's my hot take for the episode.
That's my hot take too. I mean, I'm all in favor of not banning stuff. You know, I wish they didn't ban Dockside. I wish they didn't ban Jewel Lotus and Mana Crypt. I don't even really care about Nadu that much. Like, Nadu can go fuck himself. But if you're gonna ban stuff and try and improve the format, you know, again, I'm not
Orcish Bowmaster.
Orcish Bowmaster needs to go. And you know, you'll never see me campaigning to have something banned, because I'm very strongly anti-ban. I mean, Trevor, I think you're in the same boat. But
yeah,
I think that
I'm anti-ban.
It limits things. It limits the creature decks.
I'm anti-ban, but I do think that the Dockside ban was a good thing. Ultimately.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of... I heard, like, one of my favorite Magic YouTube channels, Jake and Joel are Magic. I don't know if they coined this term, but I think it was the guy Jake was like, well, it was becoming Dockside the Gathering. So, you know what? Good point, Jake. It was becoming Dockside the Gathering. It was like, oh, hell yeah, someone's playing a Dockside? I'm going to copy it. I'm going to bounce my own Dockside. Well, I'm going to reanimate your Dockside. I'm going to, oh my God, it was literally Dockside the Gathering.
Yeah,
So
one of my favorite cards to play in Tivit was Aboleth Spawn, and that was because I mainly had two targets with it. I could copy a Dockside, which was rampant in the format at the time, or I can copy a Thassa's Oracle and win off of someone's Thassa's Oracle attempt.
yep.
I don't run it anymore because there's no Dockside.
Yeah, it's not worth it just for the Thassa, but it's for the two of the best creatures in the format. Hell yeah, I'd run it.
Hell yeah.
So yeah, I think that's it for draw. What's next?
You want to move on to Blood Moon?
Yeah, this will be a little bit of a shorter one. Basically, the Blood Moon or Magus of the Moon read non-basic lands are mountains, and Harbinger of the Seas, which is newer, non-basic lands are islands. This can be devastating.
Huge.
People aren't running non-basic or basic lands anymore. You just don't see it unless you're in a monocolored deck. Yeah, it is really rough. Now people will say, well, I've got like mana rocks and all this other stuff. You think it's not going to be as bad, but when one of these hits and you don't have an answer, it is rougher than the last time you remembered. And then it doesn't happen for a while because not only mono red decks are really running them. And then I guess since Harbinger of the Seas, I haven't seen it, but if I was an Urza, I'd play it.
Yeah, I think this effect, when it does hit the table, it's huge. It really affects everything. Like, because like you said, not everyone's not really running basic lands anymore, unless you're running like 1 to 2 colored decks. But now that Dockside's not in the format, you might be seeing Blood Moon more often because it is a significant effect of slowing down your opponents.
I think the biggest problem with it is the decks that want to, now, like you said, 1 and 2 color. I think once you get up to 3 color, I wouldn't really want to be risking it.
Yeah.
But like, let's just say in a mono red deck, that's where you're most likely to see Blood Moon or Magus of the Moon. What do you tutor those up with is the problem. There's only 2 effects of it, and you just kind of have to hope to draw into it.
So,
other than gamble.
I mean, I did run these.
I think that's the main
in my Zerta list, and I didn't really have. I guess I could search up Blood Moon with a Enlightened Tutor, but I would usually want the Enlightened Tutor to get like Basalt or Grim Monolith, so I can go infinite.
Exactly. So I think that's what's holding him back the most.
Yeah.
But again, if you're in mono red, I think it's so powerful that if you do draw into it and it hits the table, that it can be crippling, that it is worth playing at least one of them, if not both of them. I think it's almost like an all or nothing thing. There's no reason to play Magus of the Moon or Blood Moon if you're not going to play the other, at least in a mono red deck, because then it doubles the chance that you get it. And then if you don't see it, whatever, you're going faster, you're doing, your other thing that you want to be doing better. But
does Magda run these? I don't even think Magda does run these.
I don't know. Let's consult our computer. I'm just pulling up a random Magda list. So this isn't like a top tournament type thing. So let's see. Magus of the Moon. I do see it. And let's see. I'm guessing they're also going to have... No, I don't think I see any enchantments in this list. That's interesting. But I don't blame them. They can probably make more use of Magus of the Moon. There's a lot of those things that say all your creatures are this type, and then Magus of the Moon is now a dwarf and can be used to make treasures. So interesting, but that makes perfect sense. And that's
Yeah, it
just
does.
one list. I wouldn't be surprised if a bunch of lists have both those cards in it. But Harbinger of the Seas, I think, is slightly less relevant just because, limiting someone to only playing red is way more devastating than something like blue, where it's like, well, I can still play Thassa's Oracle, and I can still
You can
play
still
my
play
counter
counterspells.
spells. Yep, exactly. So, yeah, it would be cool to have some sort of blue-red Stax deck that runs all of these and back to basics, just to be a total dick.
There is a Mind Sculptors episode where they built, I can't remember the commander they built it with, but they were like, oh yeah, these effects are gnarly in a anti dockside meta, so we're just
Oh,
gonna run
yeah.
all of them in this deck.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I like them a lot. Yeah, you'll have to, when we're done here, send me that episode.
Oh yeah, I'll do that. Let's move on because there's not much to talk about with Blood Moon effects. They're
Yeah.
good at stalling out, but like they're not very proactive, I guess. So
Yeah, unless
um,
unless you can really make use of them and really devastate everyone and get around it with no problem. Yeah, I agree.
yeah, let's move up to the blind obedience effects, which I personally love these effects. These
I do
are
too. Go ahead.
these are these are artifacts and sometimes creatures, because blind obedience itself is artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Usually you'll see Dauntless Dismantler, that's just artifacts. Manglehorn, that's just artifacts your opponents control. Root Maze, artifacts and lands come in tapped, and then Thalia, creatures and non-basic lands enter tapped. All of
And
are
specifically opponents. And
yeah,
some
they're
of these.
all specifically opponents except Root Maze.
Yep. So that's kind of why, unless you're in like a mono green stacks or you're like a super specific deck, Root Maze doesn't see as much play. I will
Yeah,
say that the banning of Dockside made these slightly worse. All of
it
them.
made Dauntless Dismantler a little bit worse. I used to run
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah, just because it's only artifacts but still I think that's the main reason why you run all the other ones, to be honest. The
Yeah,
non-basic lands does help and the creatures does help, but
does help
I
sometimes.
think the
It's mainly
Manglehorn and
artifacts.
Dauntless Dismantler got hurt a little bit because everyone's going off with Dockside combos and getting the treasures, but now they can't use the treasures right away and they have to wait a turn and they can't really go infinite. You just kind of have to wait till you can get rid of these. So in Dauntless Dismantler, having that ability to destroy all of the treasures for only one white and sack itself was pretty sweet. I do still think Manglehorn, I love it in Kinnan just because you can flip off of it and destroy something. I just love having. I don't like the spin to win, mentality where I'm always just flipping it. I like having other game plans, but it's like the best backup plan ever. If all of a sudden I don't have a forward proactive thing to do, let's just flip Kinnan. And then, okay, I have an option between a Mana Dork or a Manglehorn. Yeah, I'll play the Manglehorn and blow your thing up and stacks you out a little bit. So, and I know you like Blind Obedience because of what's that combo that you run with it?
It combos with Displacer Kitten, Luris, and Lotus Petal. So uh, you sacrifice your Lotus Petal, produce a mana, and then you can cast it with Luris, and then that triggers Displacer Kitten, so you can flicker Luris, and then sacrifice the Lotus Petal again. Meanwhile, every time you cast the Lotus Petal, you can trigger the Extort ability of Blind Obedience and ping everyone down, which is just a nice little line. Like, I run it specifically because Blind Obedience is a card that I would want on the field in general because it slows down my opponents. So it's nothing that I would like search for, but like it's going to be on the field, uh, hopefully. But yeah,
But with the added
I
benefit
think
of having the extort ability to ping
it's
everyone
super
down,
nice.
and the fact that you're gaining life too is kind of like, it's just a little bit of a benefit.
Yeah. I think
I
these
think,
effects are probably the most useful because like they don't. Maybe the second most useful. I think the tax effects of
yeah,
like
the Ristic
Ristic Study
Mystic,
are the best.
Esper, Sentinel. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think,
But these are able to make sure that your opponents can't go off with like hull breaker lines. They can't go off with like with an ad nauseum right away. It just helps prevent a few lines from like going off.
not only a few line, but like a lot of the main uh,
Yeah.
things of going off, especially infinite mana is big right now. And
Oh yeah, it also takes out the Underworld Breach Lion's Eye Diamond line. Like they can't do anything with that.
yep, it does stop a lot of the main things. I think Thalia, there's a reason you don't see it as much because it doesn't stop the artifacts, so it's just not as useful. I think that's deck dependent. Root Maze, not so much, and then obviously Dauntless Dismantler got pretty hurt with the Dockside ban just because it's not as useful. But Blind Obedience and Manglehorn, two best ones on there, just because Manglehorn has the it's a creature, so it's easier to get out, and it adds to your board presence. But it also has the added benefit of removing an artifact, and then you have the Blind Obedience that has that extra combo potential and potentially a finisher. So, yeah, I think that's all we need to say about those.
Moving on to Fuck Your Graveyard.
Okay. I think these are. There's only a couple of them that I think are worth playing. And it's because while stopping something like Underworld Breach is one of the best, combos in the format, but Underworld Breach decks typically have a bunch of other ways of winning that these don't stop, and they just don't do enough on their own. But basically, it's usually they're either preventing players from casting things out of their graveyards, or it's exiling all of the cards or some cards in your opponent's graveyards, it's not a bad effect. But something like Rest in Peace, for example, where it enters and it exiles all the cards, that's pretty good. And it says if a card or token were to be put in a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Awesome, but the reason you don't see it as much is it goes against the number one rule of being proactive. This doesn't do enough else. It's just saying fuck your graveyard. And it's like, okay, well, fuck my graveyard, but I will play Thassa's Oracle. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the win there. Where I think you would have been better off having a counterspell in hand or a silence or, just anything else.
Yeah, I think the best card in this group right now is Grafdigger's Cage. Because
I would say that in Douthie. I would say it's that in Douthie.
But Grafdigger's Cage also has the added benefit of they can't cast spells from their library as well, from their graveyard, and creatures can't enter from graveyards or libraries. That small line of text like kind of adds to the effectiveness of it. It's also 1 mana, so it's easy to get out. You can search with it, or you can search for it with Urza Saga. So I think that one and Dauthi are the best ones in this category.
Absolutely. Sure. Like you said, the added benefit of not only they can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries, but creature cards in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. So that stops Winota, which I know you don't see as much anymore, but it also stops Kinnan. It really does hurt Kinnan. So, and being, like you said, 1 mana, that's huge. Douthie Voidwalker, I do love the fact that it's on a creature. I am very heavily biased towards creatures, even though they're easier to remove. The fact that they're easier to tutor, reanimate, bounce, whatever you want to do. They're easier to manipulate.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's also an unblockable piece, it's got shadow, so it's good in Tymna decks where you're trying to get combat damage in. And the fact that you can tap it and sacrifice it to play one of the exiled cards that you exiled. So you get to cast one of your opponent's cards. And the fact that you get to choose which one it is. And it's so good. I think I actually like Douthie a little bit better than Grafdigger's Cage, but I am a Kinnan player. So it makes sense why I I cringe when I see a Grafdigger's Cage. I'm like, ooh, please don't play that. Honestly, Deathrite is good, but I don't consider that an anti-graveyard. That's just, usually you're just using it as a mana dork. The other ones,
but it has
really
the added
play.
ability of like, when someone's going off with their Underworld Breach, you could be like, all right, I'll just tap my Deathrite Shaman, get rid of your Brain Freeze or whatever. Or,
True.
You can get rid of things. The same with Scavenging Ooze. Like, you can get rid of a troublesome piece to stop someone's combo if you need to.
I think as long as they belong in the deck for another reason, I need a bunch of creatures for this and I want to, but if you're just throwing a Scavenging Ooze in your deck because it has green and you want something to hate on graveyards, you need something better. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You have anything else to say about fuck the graveyard?
Just another overall point to add. So he said, number 1 is proactive. Number 2 is all about either being one-sided or breaking parity. And then another pattern I've noticed is, I would say our third point is it has to be, if it's not going to do either of those things, it's got to be really powerful. And I would say Grafdigger's Cage is one that you wouldn't want to be playing it in something like Kinnan just because it's really powerful. You have to break the parity, but because you don't want to, even if you're being proactive and you can break the parity on it, you don't want to just run a bunch of Stax pieces because having too many of them, I think, slows you down. So you want to bias towards those really powerful, cheap ones. And Grafdigger's Cage is super powerful, and Douthie is super powerful, and that's why those are the two main ones you see. I think if you're in a deck that can make use of Deathrite Shaman, I do like that it's 2 toughness, so it's less likely to bite the dust from an Orcish Bowmaster. But it is a little limited because you have to exile the land card, but fetch lands make that, more common. But all of these other ones, Lion Sash is super deck dependent. Rest in Peace, if I'm in mono white, maybe I run it just because it is one of the best. It is very powerful, but it's not proactive. Some of the other ones are just, I've seen Soulless Jailer and stuff like Winota, but yeah, I think, again, you're going to want the really powerful ones. There's a reason they're super common. But yeah, I just wanted to add that point. Where are we going now?
So we have a group of cards that I didn't know where to put. We have... Oh, stop it.
Is this the last section?
No, we have like 3 sections left. So we have that. We have the anti-search, and we have the Vexing effects, and the Torpor Orb effects. So which one do you want to talk about?
Let's just go all the way down.
Too far.
We'll go up. Let's do Vexing, because this one's pretty easy. Basically, it stops players from playing something over a certain mana cost, or that's free. So, I guess it'll be easier to read it if it's up here. So, like Boromir, for example, says when an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter it. Same with Lavinia. It's each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of lands that player controls. And that's really big in the format of cEDH, because people might usually, especially early game, they might only have 1 or 2 lands out, but they have a bunch of mana rocks. And then Lavinia is out and is like, well, yeah, you can't play your ad nauseum with all your rituals and stuff. You're going to have to get 5 lands. Sorry, bud.
Yeah. And then Vexing Bauble, same thing as Boromir. If no mana was spent to cast it, a spell, counter the spell, and Containment Priest.
If it wasn't cast.
If it wasn't cast, it gets exiled. If a creature enters.
Yeah. So I think these used to be better. We'll go back down here so we can look at all of them. Boromir sees some play. I've seen Lavinia in some blue farm decks, which is actually kind of cool.
Lavinia actually has its place in Sisse. So.
Oh, yeah, it's a great Sisse include because you get the blue and white, and then it's just helps you defend against free counter spells mainly.
Yeah.
But
and
there's a reason.
Vexing
I think
Bauble,
they're deck specific.
It's very deck specific, and Vexing Bauble sees play mainly because it's a 1-drop. You can search for it with Urza Saga, and it also has the added effect of being able to sacrifice it and draw a card. So I think Vexing Bauble is probably the best out of this category.
It depends. I think in a general sense, in a general sense, there's less cost of running it. It's kind of like, it's a 1-drop if I'm in an artifact deck or something. Lavinia is a very interesting piece. I think that's deck specific too. I think they're all very deck specific. I think Boromir sees a lot more play as of recently just because it can sacrifice himself and give all your creatures indestructible until the end of the turn, which is kind of an added, again, like extra abilities, more versatility. Not only does it protect you, it also stops free counter spells and things like that. It's hard to really, like, they're all just, I think Containment Priest is the worst of them. But again, it has its place in certain decks.
It has its place. They're all deck specific. Like, if you really need this kind of effect, like, you're looking at these 4 cards.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much it. Everything we could say about Vexing effects. You don't see them as much, but like as I slot a Lavinia in something like Sisse where it fits into my game plan, and I've got a bunch of creatures I'm trying to overrun the board, like a Jetmir. Probably going to play something like Boromir, But in a general sense, I wouldn't just jam all of these in a Stax deck. They're just, again, back to our main points, not proactive enough. But in the certain decks, they are great. Let's go
moving up to Torpor Orb effects. I don't know which card would have been the best one to name all of these effects under. I guess maybe Cursed Totem, but I just went with Torpor Orb.
Or you could call, or the Hush effects, but they're basically all anti-activated ability or anti-triggered ability from entering the battlefield. So let's talk about the best one, which is Cursed Totem.
Cursed Totem.
Activated abilities of creatures can't be activated. That is Mana Dorks. That is Kinnan, which is the big one. That's
Najeela.
That's Kenrith.
It's fucking...
I think it's Magda.
It's Magda.
That's a lot of stuff.
There's a lot of stuff it stops. It's pretty cheap. It's 2 mana. It is colorless, so it goes in every deck. Like, it's a really good card. I think...
That being said, you want to break parity with this. You do not want to be playing that. Like, Kinnan would never play this. This is just... It would ruin your whole game plan. Something like Tivit, where you don't have activated abilities. So why would,
Except
and
for
Tivit
Urza, but
wants,
why not?
exactly, who cares? You get around Urza, or you can get around this easily, or you can just say, well, that's just a very fringe combo that happens to be in the deck. But yeah, this is the most powerful of these effects. On the other side of things, you have the torpor orb or the hush effects, where creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. This is stops Thassa's oracles, and previously, before it was banned, Dockside.
It also stops Atraxa, and
that's true. There's a decent amount. There's a decent amount of things that enter and have great effects, but I think the hush effects are the less powerful of the two, just because usually, I'll say this, usually things entering are, happen once, whereas the activated abilities, people want to abuse that and activate something over and over and over again. Infinite mana into something like Thrasios, infinite mana into Kinnan, and they activate it over and over and over again, where Cursed Totem is completely shutting someone out, whereas something like Hushbringer or Hushwing Griff, it's just, if your deck completely, if it synergizes in your deck and you don't have anything that cares about ETBs, I think they're fine, but I wouldn't just jam a bunch of those in the deck unless you have a specific plan in mind.
So I don't want to keep bringing up Standard, but if you are playing Standard, Torpor Orb is in Standard, and if you are tired of Heir Apparent decks, just run Torpor Orb in your sideboard. It is wonderful at stopping those decks.
Interesting. Trevor's Standard tip of the day. We'll
Standard tip of the day.
Just for anyone who dips into Standard, or maybe they're a
Anyone
Standard player
that
dips into cEDH.
Yeah, exactly.
With all the
side
other
note,
ones,
fuck Heir Apparent.
Yeah, fuck Heir Apparent. I don't even play Standard, but I recognize that card name. Drana and Linvala, I do think, and again, this is the cost kind of limits it. You want to be in a black-white deck that has a little bit more mana and access to, though maybe, I don't know. I've seen Blood Pod lists with it.
I've seen a lot of decks with this card.
Like that, not only activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated, but Drana and Linvala have all activated abilities of all creatures your opponents control. You can spend mana as though it were any color to activate these abilities. Wow, that is a double whammy. Stuff like that, if that costed any less, it would be busted. It's already pretty damn good.
Yeah. I mean, but it's pretty hard to get out. 2 white and black and then 1 extra.
Yeah. I think the 2 white is, like, you'd be surprised.
The 2 white's very hard.
Decks with, let's say Blood Pod, you want to have, and you played Blood Pod more. I'm guessing you want a couple more black or maybe red. I mean, you're going to have white. You're going to have a little of everything, but like, would this be kind of hard to cast, at least early game, because of the 2 white?
So it's going to be harder to cast because you're relying more on mana dorks in Blood Pod, because you are running, at least in my list, I was running ouphe and Null Rod, so I wasn't relying on mana rocks. But you do have things like Avacyn's Pilgrim and what's the one that taps for black? It's not Blood
Elves of Deep Shadow.
It's Elves of Deep Shadow. But getting white, your deck is mainly white. It's actually mainly green, but like white is one of the major colors in the deck. So it's not like impossible. but it is kind of hard to get too white.
Yeah, understandable. But yeah, I think the hush or torpor orb effects are just a little bit weaker compared to the stuff like Curse Totem or the Drana and Linvala type effects.
Yeah.
Some of those other cards are very deck specific. Linvala is powerful, but Phyrexian Revoker is nice because you can choose a name, so then it doesn't ruin your own game plan, but it is limited to what you choose. So basically, if I had to pick one thing to tell everyone from this list is play Curse Totem if you can, and maybe one of the other ones, but I wouldn't give too much attention to jamming all these in.
Yeah, Curse Totem for sure, though, if you wanted that effect.
Yeah. All right,
okay,
so
moving
we went
on.
over the tax. We went over the Tangle Wire. Oof. No extra turns. Also, I actually haven't seen this one. You could do Trouble in Pairs, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's on the... I realized this like while we were recording. That Trouble in Pairs does stop extra turns, but I put it as a the untagged section, so we'll talk about that one later.
Okay. To be honest, I don't really have much to say about these. I think it's a waste just to play something to stop an extra turn. Not enough decks are doing it anymore. Things. Yeah. And even let's just returning.
Scroll up, because Trouble in Pairs is a perfect example of like it stops someone from taking an extra turn, but it is a draw engine. So it's actually worth playing.
Yeah, it is a really good draw engine. Yeah. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised.
Yeah. But besides that, what's this one? Exile Gerald to Hourglass. Return to the battlefield. Tapped all artifact, creatures, enchantments, and land cards in your graveyard, and then put in there from the battlefield this turn. So, and that's 4 and tapping it.
And so exiling it. So you can't like go infinite with it, bring it all back, and then recur this with something. You know, if there was a way, if it just sacrificed it and you could bring back, Luris or something, and then somehow sack it to get, use it to cast this, and then, put it all back in the graveyard, bring this back over and over again for some infinite mana and damage, that would be cool. But I'd say don't run this card unless there's a deck I don't know about that makes good use of it. Awesome, play it in that deck. It's probably awesome in that specific place, but I would just never play a 1 mana, even though it's cheap. It's 1 mana and it has flash just to stop extra turns. They're just not common anymore. Back when you'd have stuff like Tatiova or what is it, Edric, the green and blue one that can just keep going off with extra turns. And I know there's Tivit, but one deck, and he has a million other ways of winning. No. Sorry, Gerard. Your pendant is trash.
Pendant, don't run that. Run Trouble in Pairs. It's a way better card.
Yep, 100%. So we went over
that's it for all the tagged list. So we can go to the stuff that I didn't know where to throw.
We got one more.
Oh, can't search. Never mind. Forget what I said.
Actually, this Archon of Emeria should have been under the Rule of Law.
Oh. I did this really quickly. I'm sorry for the mistakes.
That's all right.
We'll just change tags. We'll just say, where is it?
It's also the non-basic. It has the non-basic lands enter tapped effect, which is awesome. But it's really the Rule of Law. But yeah, right, we don't have to go back into that. But these are so easy best of this is Opposition Agent.
Oh yeah.
Not even a debate. Not only can they basically, well, it doesn't say that they can't search it. You just control them So,
Yeah.
and because it has flash speed, you get a gotcha moment when someone goes to tutor, and you get to search for that card and keep it for your play instead. And then while it's out, why would anyone tutor? So basically it says opponents can't search their libraries, but you can. And if they do forget and make the mistake, which I've seen happen, in my earlier days of playing, I fucking did that. And I just wanted to quit right there and be like, yep, you win. You win.
This card is busted too, because since you're controlling your opponent, you're also able to look at their hand while you're searching their library.
Yeah, you're in control of them for that moment. You can't do anything like sack all their creatures or something, but you're right. You do get access to information that they have.
Yeah.
Like their hand. Even Mind Sensor, go ahead.
I used to hate Opposition Agent because I thought, why, you play it and then it doesn't really do anything because you're not seeing all the tutors that are in everyone's hands. And now I realize, like, that's the reason why you fucking play it. Like, it stops everyone from tutoring, which is, like, one of the main things you do in this format.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the added benefit of having a creature on the field and the flash speed, gotcha, I think is worth running it. The other two don't see as much play. Ashiok is super deck dependent. And even so, it's just, I don't like the Planeswalkers as much in Commander. They're really easy to get rid of, especially in a mid-range format.
It doesn't have flash, which
doesn't have flash.
Even Mindcester at least has flash, so you can get the gotcha moment.
Yeah. I guess Ashiok has the added benefit of exiling each opponent's graveyard if you want to do that, but yeah, I don't like, you can't really tutor for them I guess if you're in black you have access to all the tutors, but it feels like such a waste. Why would you ever tutor this? Even Mind Sensor, the limiting to the top 4, that hurts more than you think. They can still get stuff, so it's not as good as just completely stopping them. I like the flash and the flying. It goes in stuff like Winota that wants non-humans, or Tymna decks. I would say it's decent in as another flyer, but to get in for damage. But
yeah,
again, still it kind of goes, what's the most proactive of these cards? Opposition Agent, because you're stealing a card and preventing them from tutoring, as opposed to even Mind Sensor, which just says, you can still search, but it's limited, so it does hurt you. And I think that, it just goes back to our point. You have to be
even
proactive.
If you're just stealing a land from a fetch land search, like, you're still getting value off. You're having your opponent waste a land drop, and you're getting ramp off of it. So even then, it's still worth it.
Yeah. And then I think we have one more section.
No, that's it. There's just the untagged stuff, which is, we could talk about individually. Well, we talked about Trouble in Pairs already, but
let's do those two real quick.
Hold up. Dress Down's not really a stacks piece. I'm just going to remove this. This is more of an interaction piece.
Agreed. Even though it's good.
It's good. Oh, it's perfect. And for those who don't know,
counterbalance real quick. Oh yeah, go ahead.
For those who don't know, if you want to get around someone's Grand Abolisher, play Dress Down on the person's turn before their turn during the end step, because then it just stays on the field, and then they won't have the Grand Abolisher ability. It's perfect interaction you can do.
Oh yeah. Good tip.
All right, what did you want to talk about?
Counterbalance.
Counterbalance.
So
I love this card.
While I could see people saying, well, isn't that kind of interaction because it's countering stuff? But because it's on the field and it's not a guarantee, it falls more in that category, kind of like Trevor, you said, it changes the way you play the game. You know, your opponent is going to think twice before casting stuff. I've played against a lot of counterbalances, and I definitely change. I'm like, okay, so I can play kind of a probing, you know, maybe I play my Soul Ring first to see, oh, it's a 1 CMC thing, so that gets countered. Okay, I can't cast 1 CMC spells right now. I have to figure out a way around it. And it sucks. Even if it doesn't counter your stuff, you're still like all of us. Let's say I play that Soul Ring and it's a 2 mana spell. Well, okay, I can't recast my Kinnan this turn, or I can't play my Thassa's Oracle, or you know, you have to come up with creative ways of almost tricking them into using it. But yeah, it's rough to play around.
It's
and
rough.
Sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't. But when it does, even if it doesn't hit, even if you're not getting the things to counter your opponent's spells that often, I think it's still going to slow everyone down. And the added benefit of countering. I don't currently run it in any decks, but I think it has a place.
I run it in my Tivit deck because being able to use the clue tokens that Tivit produces to change the top card of my library is really useful with the counterbalance. Because like,
oh, that's the perfect reason to run it. That's you turned a Stax piece into a proactive piece because you have it synergizes with your deck.
Yeah. Or if you're running Sensei's Dividing Top, you run counterbalance. I think that's an auto include if you have Sensei's.
Yeah. And then something like Sanctum Prelate. This is a really weird effect. You don't see this very often. When it enters, you choose a number, and then non-creature spells with mana value equal to the chosen number can't be cast. It kind of goes along. There's another card, I can't think of it right now, but we talked about already, where it's not with the choosing the number, but just not being able to cast certain types of spells.
Yeah.
If you're, it's deck specific. But if you know, and I think it's also meta specific, if you know
sure.
You're going to be, you know, I know you can't make swaps, but if you know I'm going to see a lot of Kinnans, I'm going to see a lot of Tivits, you know, putting 2 on this, you know, you're going to they can't cast Time Sieve, they can't cast Thassa's Oracle, they can't cast their Kinnan. That other card right there that everyone loves to hate, Droneth Magistrate.
Oh, another reason to run it. Hashton's going to be in the format. It's probably going to be running rampant. You can run Sanctum Prelate, say 2, and then they can't cast their Hashton. So
with that being said, though, I think it's a little specific. I'm not a huge fan of that card.
I would run very specific decks. If I wanted this ability, I would do it. I don't. But
even so, there's too many things that can get around it. So
yeah.
Mayhem Devil is another one, a great example where if you have a way of turning it into a finishing piece, it's awesome.
Perfect.
If you're in Corvald, it is an auto include. If you're in anything, unfortunately, Dockside Infinite Treasures used to be the ultimate way of using this, but if you have anything that can infinitely sacrifice and deal damage to everyone and kill everyone instantly, that is the reason to run this. But then it has the added benefit of being a Stax piece. That will, you know, anytime anyone else is sacrificing anything, it's dealing damage to them. So I think it is deck specific, but this is a really good card in those decks. It's proactive.
It used to be a lot better when Dockside was in the format, and then you could just drop it and be like, no one can, you know, you can't go off with your Dockside tokens anymore. But yeah, it's still good in the current meta.
And the one that is so powerful that I think even though it's not proactive, if you have white, you're probably playing it. Draneth Magistrate.
Draneth Magistrate. I don't even think there's a lot to say about this card. Like, it's just so fucking good.
It stops anyone from casting their commanders or your opponents, so it's one-sided. Checks that box, and it also stops Underworld Breach combos and anything else where they're casting spells from exile anywhere other than their hands. It says it right on the card. Yep. It's if we were ranking them, this would be in the top tier. I do like the fact that it's higher toughness and it sticks around. It's not as likely to be killed by an Orcish Bowmaster. So, Droneth Magistrate, it's one of those ones where it doesn't really do anything other than stopping things, but it's so powerful. It kind of hits on that third point where I said, if it doesn't, it automatically breaks parity by being one-sided.
Oh, yeah.
It's not necessarily proactive, but it is super powerful, and I think because of that, it's worth it. Now, just because you have white, I think you don't always have to run it. If you're trying to go extra fast, maybe exclude this for another ritual or another tutor or a counterspell or whatever. But most decks with white are going to run this.
Yeah.
And then Trevor, why don't you take care of that last one right there? That's a Trevor card.
This is one of my favorite cards. Okay, so Chalice of the Void, if you don't know, is X and X, and then Chalice of the Void enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. When a player casts a spell with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Chalice of the Void, counter that spell. So, you can play this spell for either 0, and then all the 0 drops are countered, or you can play it for 2, and then all 1 drops are countered, which is massive.
Both of those are huge.
Or you can pay 4 and 2 drops, which I think are more relevant, but getting it out turn 1, turn 2 is so fucking impactful in the game. Especially just dropping it for 0 mana turn 1 and then being like, okay, so you can no longer play your Mox Diamonds. You can't play any of your Moxes really. It's just so huge. I love this card.
Yeah, it is really good. The fact that that it's essentially can be a 0 drop and it's instantly on turn 1 is huge. And then, like you said, 2 drops are probably the most relevant in the format, the most common next to 1, but you're probably not going to pay 4 mana for it. But late game, if you top deck this and you've got a lot of mana, hell yeah. I mean, it's very versatile. It's good at any point in the game. It's in the similar category as... I almost want to put it in the Linvala category, same with Counterbalance, where it's countering stuff. But it belongs in its own little section. It's just that good.
It's just that good. And then also, if you want to play for 2 mana, and then you pretty much can counter most counter spells, because most counter spells are 1 drops. So just eliminating countering anybody's shit in the game is huge.
All right.
Yeah.
So
that's the list.
What did we learn today? So one last time, I bet everyone's sick of us saying this, but it really Stax. If you want to play Stax, you got to understand it's in a bad place right now due to the number of mid-range decks running rampant in the format, which Stax traditionally doesn't stack up well against. But if you're gonna play it, don't build a specific Stax deck. I'm building a Stax list. Don't do that. Have a more mid-range control with a specific strategy that is proactive, and play the proactive Stax pieces that fit with that are either one-sided, so asymmetrical, or you can break parity with, and only play the most powerful ones. There's a video that I cannot recommend enough The guy on cEDH TV did a breakdown on the math behind Stax pieces. He did one for, I think, tutors and counterspells, where he took a ton of data from all these tournaments and he said, okay, how many Stax pieces are in the decks that perform the best? And they kind of have a bell curve of like, this is the sweet spot. And I think it was something around like 3 Stax pieces was the best.
Okay.
So,
that sounds about right.
Yeah. You want to have a couple really powerful, the best of the best. If you're going to play one of these, play Droneth. If you're going to play one of these, Blind Obedience or Manglehorn. If you're going to play the Can't Search, play Opposition Agent. Just play the best ones. Do not be fucking around and, I want to say fuck your graveyard. I'm going to play Grafdiggers, and I'll play Rest in Peace and Scavenging Ooze and, all the other ones. No, play Grafdigger's Cage and Douthie and call it a day,
Or if you
throw
want
some more tutors.
Deathrite, just run Deathrite.
Yeah, Deathrite. Deathrite's good.
Yeah. And then, I think, Ian, I couldn't say it better than you did, so.
No, you couldn't have. Yeah.
No.
If you wanted to. All right. I think we should call it. I think our audience, if their brains are as fried as ours, we'll be ready for a break.
Please like, comment, and subscribe on this video. It shows that you actually enjoy it, and it gives us immense joy. And we'll continue to make more content thanks to that. If you want extra content that we put out, you can follow us on the Twitters or the Blue Sky or Instagram or TikTok, if I haven't gotten sick of TikTok yet. You can also support us directly on Patreon. And I will return the compliment and say I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, that's right.
You're so damn good at those socials. That's why I make you do it every time.
Hilariously, I'm like incredibly anti-socials, and I'm the one in charge of the socials.
I love it. It's perfect. It's perfect for you.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time.